Hi everyone, Happy New Year. I hope you managed to have a nice Christmas, but if you're like me, you're probably glad to see the back end of 2020. So let's hope this next year is going to be a bit better. I'm here to give you another reading from my book, The Chronicles of Teng. And if you've been keeping up with me, well done. It's nice to still have an audience. As you may recall from our last session before Christmas, Edgar Blake and his two companions had reached Sera Monastery in Tibet in search of Teng, the old monk. They'd spent the night there, but rudely wakened in the early hours of the morning by military trucks entering the courtyard and sounding off their horns to let their presence known. Right, chapter 6, Teng. Outside, military trucks and police cars lit up the whole courtyard. Soldiers were busy searching the buildings opposite and in the process exercising their authority by pushing the monks around. Suddenly, the back doors opened and a boy ran inside and pulled Blake's arm. "Hey, what's going on? Can't a man get some sleep around here?" shouted Leo as he sat upright. "Please, hurry. Collect your belongings. We must leave now," voiced the old monk standing in the doorway. "How about you?" asked Susan. "Will you be all right?" "We have had over 60 years of this. Do not be concerned," replied the old monk. The two young monks they had met earlier were waiting outside for them as they made their exit. "I leave you in very capable hands," said the old monk. "This is Gnu and Mingyu. These young monks will be your eyes and ears in the dark. They will take you to Teng. Good luck and safe journey." With that, the old monk went back inside and waited for the soldiers. The night air was cold and crisp. They made their way down a dark stony hillside, leaving behind them the soldiers and the police. The monks of Sera Monastery were in for another sleepless night. The fate of the lamas at Sera Monastery once again in the hands of the authorities. The young monk Gnu took the lead, whilst Mingyu and the boy dropped to the back, with Blake, Leo and Susan sandwiched safely in the middle of them. "Do you think they'll come to any harm, Edgar?" asked Susan. "I'd like to think that they'd be in trouble because of us." "No, they know what they're doing. They'll be all right," reassured Blake, hiding his own concerns. They had only travelled about half a mile when the sound of gunfire echoed into the night. The party stopped, fearing the worst. Blake wanted to turn back. "Please, Professor," urged Gnu, the lead monk. "We must continue. There is nothing we can do." It took the combined efforts of Susan and Leo to dissuade Blake from turning back. Blake reluctantly continued on, with a feeling of guilt, but also a newfound determination. If anything had happened to the monks at Sera Monastery, he didn't want it to have been in vain. The going was slow, treacherously slow, with only the moonlight to light their way, but they reached a ravine which helped, and they followed its course for a short while. Eventually, they started to climb upwards. At the top was a road of a sort, badly neglected, but which made the going a lot more easier, except that they had to duck out of sight every now and then at the sound of approaching vehicles. After about 2 kilometres, they left the road and scrambled up and down hills. They reached a rock face where they stopped to rest and shelter from the bitter cold wind. On the horizon, faint purple bands of light started to appear in the early morning sky, and the contours of a far-off mountain range could now be discerned. Trying to make himself heard above the wind, one of the monks, Gnu, shouted something in Tibetan to Blake. "What did he say?" Blake asked, looking back at Susan. Before she could answer, the monk interrupted. "I'm so sorry, Professor," apologised the monk. "I forget to speak English. I'm telling you that it is not too far now." "That's good. I don't like the look of those skies," Blake shouted as he tried to make himself heard above the howl of the wind. Leo was stamping his feet, trying to get some feeling back. Then his curiosity got the better of him. "I wonder," he pointed, "do those monks wear underwear under those robes?" Gnu, overhearing Leo, laughed and promptly hoisted up his robes to reveal a pair of yakskin leggings. In Tibet, the weather can change in the blink of an eye. When in the mountains, it is wise to be prepared for all the events, as I think we shall soon see, he said ominously, looking up at the sky. Dark clouds came rolling over like a curtain being drawn, effectively blocking out the moonlight and threatening the land below. A whip-like crack of lightning lit up the clouds, followed by the deep rumble of thunder echoing off the mountains. Now reduced to feeling their way along the rock face, the pace had slowed to a crawl. Small droplets of rain started to fall, and then the heavens opened up, bombarding the defenceless party with hailstone, made all the more worse by the driving winds. Still they struggled on. Then Susan let out a scream as the stinging pain of hail proved too much for her. Mingyu shouted to Gnu. He had spotted a building in the distance. They made their way over to it. It was a sad-looking derelict hut, but a very welcome refuge to a group of cold, wet and weary travellers that wanted to sit out the storm. Blake's vivid recollections of the past few days abruptly came to an end when Gnu physically manhandled him up from the floor and threw him out of the doorway, where the others were already waiting. "Didn't you hear us shouting?" voiced Susan. Blake looked confused. "No, I was just recalling how we came to be in this mess." "He's acting weird again," said Leo. Blake, now fully alert, realised why Gnu had seemingly attacked him. A few seconds later, the last remnants of the corrugated tin roof came crashing down. After the rubble had settled, they re-entered the hut to receive their belongings. Blake apologised to Gnu and thanked him heartily for saving his life, for a sheet of rusty roofing lay embedded in the spot where Blake had been sat. Gnu spoke of the derelict place being used as a shelter for refuge before, pointing to the bullet holes that riddled the outside of the walls, a sad reminder of a grim past. Or was it the past? "Well, at least the hail stopped," sighed Susan, shaking her yakskin coat. "Yeah, but the rain's back," moaned Leo, as they carried on their journey, squelching their way down a rain-sodden ravine. The dark storm clouds went as fast as they arrived. On the horizon, the sun was slowly rising from behind the sleepy mountains. A new day was being born. Drenched and sorrowful looking, they walked along the ravine slopes, holding on to any foliage they could for safety. Just as Leo was about to start complaining again, the lead monk stopped and pushed some heavy foliage to one side, revealing a well-hidden tunnel. The boy, who had been accompanying the monk Mingyu at the rear, came forward and entered the dark opening. Gnu motioned the others to stay where they were, while he joined the boy and disappeared inside. The monk's voice could be heard as he tried to make his presence known. "Oyez! Oyez!" A few moments later, the boy appeared at the entrance, holding a butter lamp, and behind him Gnu followed, supporting a very old and frail monk. The emaciated figure of the old monk looked like Father Time himself. Long, thin white hair hung down from his head, and a thin white nanny-goat beard dropped down from his chin. His face was gaunt and expressionless. He looked at and through Blake as only a blind man can. The fragile frame of the old man, bent and deformed with the passage of time, struggled to support what little weight he had. Supporting him in his left hand was an intricately carved walking stick, the handle made of solid ivory. This was the only material possession he allowed himself, a cherished present from a dear friend. This was the first time he had ventured outside of his underground home for many years. He took a few hesitant steps forward towards Blake and the others. A strong gust of wind whistled down the ravine. The gnarled hands of the old man failed to keep the tattered saffron robe around his body, and seeing his plight, the two young monks used their bodies as windbreaks. The old man coughed, then cleared his throat. "Please, please, come inside," he croaked. "Are you Teng?" hesitated Blake, as they slowly followed the old monk and the boy down a small, narrow tunnel, which was dimly lit by butter lamps. "No, I am..." The old monk paused for a moment and cleared his throat again, and then continued. "No, I am not Teng. Please excuse my speech. I have not spoken to an English person for many, many years." Blake's heart sank. It was not the answer he was hoping for. Then Susan spoke to the old man, using her limited knowledge of the Tibetan language, with a lot of Chinese thrown in. "Ah," rasped the old man. "All in good time, young lady. All in good time. Your Tibetan Chinese is adequate. However, you need to eliminate tones. Unlike Chinese, Tibetan is a non-tonal language. Do not get the two mixed up," smiled the old man. "What did you say to him?" asked Leo. Susan muttered something to herself. Then, "Well, I think I asked him if he knew where Teng was. Or at least I hope I did." There was a dank, musty smell about the tunnel as they blindly followed the old monk in the half-light of the butter lamps. 30 metres into the tunnel, they reached a small cave and entered. Inside, the boy lit 2 more butter lamps, while the 2 young monks helped the old man sit down on a large cushion, not unlike a beanbag. The boy hurried out of the cave and returned a few moments later with more cushions. Blake, Susan and Leo sat down facing the old man. The boy carefully wrapped a yakskin cover around the old man's shoulders. It was clear to see that the boy cared a great deal for the old man. "My friends, Professor Blake, you ask for Teng." The old man paused. "Teng is dead." "Oh no," cried Blake. "Yes, he died some 100 years ago," said the old monk. "Then who sent for us?" voiced Blake. The old monk gave a wheezy laugh, the first time he had done so in many years. "It was I. My real name is of no importance. However, you may call me Teng if you so wish. You have the pouch?" he asked. Yes," replied Blake, still trying to come to terms with the fact that he was actually sat in front of the mysterious Teng. "Oh, I am so sorry. You need to get out of those wet clothes, eat, rest and sleep. You must be weary. I have much to tell you, but it can wait a little longer." Teng closed his eyes and sat motionless in the lotus position, a cross-legged position adopted by Buddhist monks for meditation. "Old man, we've not come all this way to sleep in a cave, and a cold damp one at that," voiced Leo impatiently. "Young man," Teng's voice now took on a grave tone, "I have been in this cave for the past 40 years. My time upon this earth is near its end. It is important that you rest, that you are refreshed, for you have much to learn and remember, and you cannot do this if you are tired. I have endured long and hard. I do not want it all to be in vain. My assistants, my students, they have suffered much also." Teng paused, deep in thought. For a few moments nothing was said. Then he cleared his throat and continued. "I have been trying to contact you for 1 year now. Professor, one of my students was tortured to death for refusing to tell what he knew. Another is still in the hands of the Chinese." The old man faltered as he got emotional. Blake looked at Leo, who evaded his eyes, too embarrassed by the comments he had made. What was so important that monks would sacrifice their lives rather than reveal what they know to the Chinese, thought Blake. His gaze turned back to Teng. "I'm sorry for my friend's outburst. You are right. We are all tired. We will rest." The 2 young monks laid out yakskins on the floor and snuffed out all but one of the lamps, which they put in the middle of the cave. After doing so, they left. "Best get out of these wet clothes," whispered Blake. "We can hang them over there," he said, pointing to some rocks that were lying along one wall. They took off their soggy outer garments, wrung them out, and draped them over the rocks. Blake and Leo, already down to their boxer shorts, gave Susan their full attention. What do you think you two are doing? Turn around right now," she insisted. "This is not a peep show." Susan proceeded to take off the rest of her wet clothes. "Leave something on for the imagination," said Blake, laughing. "Shh! Okay, you pair of lechers, you can turn around now." Susan was under her yakskins. "Hey, nice polka dot shorts, Leo," smiled Susan. Leo quickly dived under the cover of his yatskin before she noticed the Disney logo on his vest. Susan silently pointed to Teng. "Looks just like a statue. He must be asleep." "No, he is in deep meditation," replied the monk Mu, who had just entered the cave carrying a small pot of herb tea, accompanied by the boy who had some dried food in his hands. "Oh, that's better. Nice and hot," whispered Susan as she sipped at the tea, but pulling her face at the bitter taste. "I'm tired, but I don't think I could sleep just yet," murmured Leo as he finished his tea. "I know what you mean. I've got too much on my mind as well," remarked Blake. However, a few moments later, Leo was sound asleep. Susan was soon to follow. Blake was so hungry and was busy chewing his dried meat, or he too would have drifted off also. After he had finished, he lay there in his makeshift sleeping bag, gazing at the small figure of Teng in deep meditation. The lamp in the middle of the cave projected a larger-than-life shadow of the old monk onto the back wall, which changed shape and danced to the ever-changing flicker of the lamp. Blake now also succumbed to the inevitable and fell into a deep sleep. Waking up, they found the old man still sitting upright in the lotus position. Blake got up and went over to the clothes. "Well, I didn't expect these to be dry," said Blake, throwing them to Susan and Leo. "They were soaking wet last night." "Ah, good, you are awake," uttered Teng. "You know, I think that was the best night's sleep I've ever had," commented Susan as she stretched. "What time is it anyway?" "I don't know," replied Blake. "I can't see properly in this light." Time, time, time. Why is man so obsessed with time today?" said Teng, easing off his yatskin blanket that was draped over his shoulders. "Well now, do you all feel refreshed after your 2 days of sleep?" "2 days? No way," cried Leo, pulling on his trousers and looking at Blake. "Well, that accounts for the dry clothes then," reasoned Blake. Teng laughed, but then started coughing violently. Susan gave him a sip of water that was by his side. "Please excuse me. I have not laughed in many years. I am not used to it." After another sip of water, he continued. "Yes, my friends, you have slept long with the aid of the hot herbal tea you drank. You are in need of much rest and sleep after your long journey here." "Teng, you speak good English. Where did you learn?" asked Susan. "A long time ago," Teng recalled. "When I was but a young man, British missionaries came to Lhasa. My master told me that I had to learn English, as I would be needing it in the future. So here now is my need." The old man paused, sat silent for a moment, and then continued. "You know, young lady, this is the first time I have spoken to an English-speaking person since those days long, long ago. A few years ago, however, I taught a few of the students from Sarah Monastery English. It was no easy task. I had to do it all from memory." How old are you, Teng?" asked Blake. "If you don't mind me asking." "My age is of no importance, but since you ask..." Teng paused, trying to recollect. Age was of no importance to him, so he did not remember it instantly. Only important things were recalled without effort. Well now, I was 80 years plus when the Chinese invaded our land. There was complete silence as they all looked at each other in total disbelief. But that would make you... Leo stopped and began to calculate. Before Leo could work it out, the old man continued. Believe it or not, young man, it is the truth. My body may be failing, I may be blind, but my memory is still intact. Professor, you do have the pouch? He asked again. Yes, I have brought it with me, replied Blake. Good, sighed Teng. 1 year ago there was another pouch on its way to you. Inside was a note and a golden plaque. Something to gain your interest, like the statue you now have. Teng again paused to recall. And sip of some water. Yes, I had arranged for the plaque and the note to be smuggled out of Tibet and sent to you in the US. Regrettably, they were intercepted by a Chinese patrol. The young monk, when confronted, ran off the highway. He managed to hide the note. However, the plaque and the young monk were soon in the hands of the Chinese. They interrogated that young monk for many months. He would not reveal anything. He died in their hands, that you and I may get a second chance. Once again they all looked at each other in total disbelief. Did the plaque have the same writing as on this statue? Asked Susan. Yes, the plaque and the statue are from the same place. Then I think I've seen a copy of it. It's in the hands of the PSB officers in Lhasa Town, voiced Susan. They asked me if I could translate it for them. But you couldn't, could you? Smiled the old man. Just then one of the young monks entered the cave carrying tea and rice cakes. We're not going to sleep for another 2 days, are we? Said Leo jokingly. The old man laughed as he took a sip of his tea. Eat and drink. If nature calls, the boy will show you where to go. However, please stay inside. It is not safe to go out. Chinese are looking for you, even as we speak. Teng, how did you come to know of me? Asked Blake curiously. Ah, sighed Teng. That was no easy task. Our meeting has been over 2 years in the making. 2 years? Said Susan. Yes, young lady. You all know, of course, of the plight of the Tibetan people, our struggle. My people have been forced into exile in neighbouring countries. They are now scattered all over the world. Some of these loyal patriots were entrusted with the task of seeking out a person such as yourself. A selfless person, not greedy, trustworthy and sympathetic to the Tibetan cause. A person who seeks only the truth. So here you are, smiled Teng. Of course, they were not told the real reason for their mission, their search, for obvious reasons. We have contacts all over the world, he continued. We waited patiently. Then, a group in your US read an article of yours. I think about our Tibetan myths. You showed promise, so you were unknowingly watched and followed for many, many months. We had to be sure that you were suitable. Teng paused and took a sip of tea. Well, I hope I can fulfil your expectations of me, remarked Blake. You will, that I am sure of, said Teng confidently. How can you be so sure? Pressed Blake. I have my way, smiled Teng. Now please listen carefully. I have a story to tell. My time upon this earth is near its end. Before our journey to the heavenly fields, I have to pass on all my memories and knowledge of something that happened over 100 years ago. This has been the sole purpose of my life. I do not envy you, young man, said Teng, reaching out and touching Blake on the shoulder. Your task, your mission, will be to tell the world. You see, I have what you might call a photographic memory. I remember all I see and hear. I have lived on a special diet all my life, a diet that has given me all the essential minerals to keep my mind and brain from deteriorating. That is why I can still recall these events of so long ago with such clarity. Teng took a sip of tea and beckoned the boy to refill his cup. The boy did so, then gave him a pouch containing special herbs. Please be patient with me, said Teng, as he took some of the leaves out and put them into his mouth. While my mind is still healthy and active, my body deteriorates. I still have the body of a very old man, and like the moving parts of a motor vehicle, over the passage of time, it has worn out. There has been many a time that I wished I did not have this task, this burden. My master, as did his before him, passed on this knowledge to me, so that I, when the time was right, would pass it on, and the entire world might know the truth. They all sat totally captivated by the old man's words. The more he spoke, the more they wanted to hear. As the old man paused to remember, they all remained totally silent for fear of missing anything. Then he continued. What I am about to tell you will astound you. You may not believe. You may not want to believe, but all I say is true, as you will find out for yourselves. You, my friends, have the benefit of living in an age of technology, so maybe you will be able to accept it more readily than I was at that time, many, many years ago. It started so very long ago, when I was a young medical student at Chakpori Medical College. One day, I was accompanying my guide and master, Lama Mingia Tompa, on a herb gathering trip to the mountains, a trip we had done many times before. As usual, I carried all the provisions, which normally was for 3 days' travel. However, this time my master told me to pack enough for 7 days. So you can imagine my concern, a backpack nearly as big as I. We journeyed further and climbed higher than we had ever done before. I kept on asking where we were going, but never got an answer. We just kept climbing and climbing. It was our summer, which was very nice in the lowlands, but still very cold in the mountains. My master was not a young man, and he had to take special herbs to keep his strength up. Teng paused as the boy gave him a sip of water. The old man was not used to talking so much, especially in English, having virtually led the life of a hermit for so many years. He would, when the need arose, speak to the 2 young monks from Sera Monastery, but even then speech was kept to a minimum. On the 3rd day, continued Teng, we came upon a vertical rock face. Up until this point my master seemed to know where he was going, but now he stood there looking for another route. Or so I thought. We were very high up on a ledge. I stood there looking down at the valley below, which was covered in low clouds. It looked as if I could just step out of those clouds and walk right across the valley. I turned to my master, but to my surprise he had disappeared. I panicked, shouted frantically, even looked back over the ledge. Then I heard the distinctive loud bellowing laugh of my guide and master. I spun around on the ledge, but saw no one, only the rock face stood before me. Master, I shouted, where are you? Then, to my utter fright, he appeared to walk right out of the rock face itself. I fell back in astonishment. What magic is this, master? I cried. He rushed towards me, pulling out my robes, for when I fell back, I hadn't realised just how near I was to walking across those clouds, or more precisely, falling through them. Once again, Teng paused and slowly lifted his cup to his lips. A finger of his right hand, strategically placed just inside the brim, told him when to stop tipping and when to start drinking. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. My master was still laughing. He took hold of my robe and pulled me toward the opening in the rock face. I struggled, for I had no desire to be swallowed up by the mountain. My struggles were in vain though. My master, being so much larger than I, pulled me into the rock face. which was in fact crystalline in structure, effectively reflecting back on itself. It was this mirror effect that so effectively concealed a large crack that was the way into the mountain. Inside, we lit a couple of butter lamps and carried them with us as we walked down the tunnel, which was quite steep. I remembered looking back and feeling panic as the light from the tunnel entrance faded. In my early years, I had a fear of small, dark, confined spaces, and here I was, journeying down a small, dark tunnel into the heart of a mountain. The tunnel started to twist and turn. Teng was interrupted as one of the young monks ran into the cave. Obviously alarmed and anxious, he spoke to him. "A line of soldiers walking along the top of the ravine," explained Teng. "We must remain very silent until they pass. Do not worry. They have been all over this ravine before. They do not even know of my existence," he assured in a low voice. The boy went over to the old man and helped him to get to his feet. "Please stay here. I shall be back shortly." With that, Teng left the cave. The boy and the young monk accompanying him. "Well, Ed," whispered Leo, "what do you think of his story?" "Fascinating. I only hope we can get to hear the rest of it," replied Blake, who was more than a little worried in spite of Teng's assurances. After a short while, Blake walked across the cave and gazed into the blackness of the tunnel, but could see nothing. Straining his ears, he could just make out the faint shuffle of feet and distinctive tapping noise of Teng's walking stick. But the tapping noise was getting nearer, and it was coming from the opposite direction to the tunnel entrance. As Blake's eyes adjusted to the darkness of the tunnel, he could just make out the vague outline of the old man as he shuffled nearer and into the lamplight coming from the cave. Teng had been blind for many years now, and though the ravages of time and old age had taken its toll, his senses were much keener now, and he knew the tunnels like the back of his hand. "Professor, you are worried," remarked Teng as he twisted and twirled his nanny-goat beard. Teng had taken Blake by surprise, because he didn't think Teng knew he was standing there, sightless as he was. Yes, I am," replied Blake. "Is everything all right?" "Do not worry yourself. If those accursed Chinese should find the tunnel entrance in the ravine, it can be sealed off immediately with a planned rockfall. Then we can make our escape out of another exit. I was wondering though, should we extinguish the lamps? The smell of the butter burning." "Professor, we are so far inside these tunnels, the smell does not reach the outside." He entered the cave and quietly assumed his lotus position. Blake stayed out in the tunnel, wondering what the two monks were up to, when one of them silently appeared out of the blackness, adding one or two more white hairs to Blake's head. "Please, Professor, can you help?" asked Nu in a hushed voice. Blake followed him back up the tunnel towards the entrance, feeling their way in the dark. Leo, having seen Blake go off with Nu, wanted to follow, but Susan insisted that he stay there in the cave with her. Back at the tunnel entrance, Blake and the young monk slowly rolled a large, round piece of rock behind the opening, thus effectively blocking the entrance. The soldiers could now be heard outside in the ravine itself, with the officer sounding off his orders. This time they were working their way through the heavy foliage on the steep banks, thrusting their gun butts into the undergrowth, looking for openings. Blake and Nu were stood anxiously behind the rock, when a clank of metal and rock startled them both, causing them both to jump back several feet. One of the soldiers had unwittingly come across the tunnel entrance. However, because of the large lump of rock he had hit with his gun, he assumed, as was intended, that nothing was behind it. An hour went by since Teng had returned to the cave and resumed his lotus position. The others were lying quietly on the atskins, also in deep thought. Outside, the soldiers were working their way out of the ravine. They had come across the tunnel entrance without even noticing it. So good was the camouflage. Mingyu, who had been on lookout elsewhere in the ravine, returned through another entrance to give the all clear when he saw the soldiers fading off into the distance. "Thank God for that," exclaimed Leo after hearing the news. "Yes, indeed we must," remarked Teng. "This is the closest they have come to finding my home, although I think that your presence here in Tibet may have something to do with that." Teng waited until he had their full attention, again including the boy and the two young monks. Having already heard a little of his story before, they wanted to hear more. "Well now, I have a story to finish," started Teng. "Where was I? Ah, yes. We had entered this vast tunnel system. My master and I, carrying butter lamps, made good progress, forever downwards. We walked for how long or how far, I do not know. I only know that I was becoming weary, very weary. The pack on my back seemed to get heavier and heavier, almost as if I was bearing the full weight of the mountain above me. At last we levelled out. The tunnel got wider and our butter lamps grew brighter, or so I thought. "Extinguish the lamps," ordered my master. "But master, the darkness," I replied anxiously, holding tightly onto my lamp. My master extinguished his, which didn't seem to affect the brightness in the tunnel. I plucked up some courage and extinguished mine also. Teng paused. The boy opened up a pouch, took a pinch of powder and sprinkled it into a cup of water. Teng slowly sipped at it as his eager audience patiently waited. Susan couldn't help but notice the bond that the man and the boy seemed to share, almost like father and son, she thought, though very unlikely to be so, considering the age of the old man. She looked at them both with wonder and admiration, the boy seeming to sense the old man's every need even before he asked. The boy took the empty cup and wiped the old man's chin. Teng cleared his throat and continued. To my utter astonishment, the tunnel was still bright. My master told me all about the luminous rock as we walked. Fascinating as it was, I was still tired, weary, aching, and about to collapse from sheer exhaustion when we came to an abrupt halt. A solid rock wall stood in front of us, a dead end. Looking up, I noticed that the roof of the tunnel had now disappeared, and that the rock walls just vanished into the blackness high up above. We had passed so many thoughts in our journey down the tunnels, surely we had taken the wrong turning. I asked my master, but he did not answer. Had he taken leave of his senses? I thought. There he was, pushing and banging on this solid rock wall. Did he possibly hope to knock it down or push it out of the way so that we could carry on our journey? Surely not. He continued to push and bang on that wall for quite some time. I, meanwhile, had collapsed on the floor and was sat watching in puzzlement. Then all of a sudden there was a loud rumble and dust fell from above. Tired as I was, I leapt up and started running back down the tunnel, fearing the whole mountain was about to fall in on us. A large cloud of dust followed me and I ran faster. But then I remembered my master. I had to help him. I ran back down the tunnel through the dust to what I thought would be certain death, when the sound of my master's laughter stopped me in my tracks. There he was, sat down, laughing again at me. We were about to die, and he was laughing uncontrollably. As the dust started to settle, I noticed that the adjacent wall to that which my master was so enthusiastically pushing was slowly rising up. An age-old mechanism of wheels and cogs had been set in motion for the first time in decades. Creaking out a moan of reluctance, the rock-faced door slowly rose. The grating and rumbling of what must have been an immense weight vibrated through my very bones, sending a deep resounding echo down the tunnel. Now there we were, standing in the doorway of this vast cavern, the size of which I could only compare to a large monastery. The dust that had been disturbed had now settled. The whole of the cavern was bathed in light, not bright, but serene, and light enough to see the far side of the cavern. High up overhead, there were hundreds of large round orbs of light, not unlike our lanterns at festival time. Strange devices and machines of all sizes were covering the entire cavern. Remember now, Teng panted, struggling to find his breath. This all happened over 100 years ago. Technology had not reached Tibet at that time. My master was also a young man when he first set eyes on this place. I myself have been back only once, and that was on my own. Blake, Leo and Susan looked at each other in total wonder. "Oh," rasped Teng, "just to be able to see your faces right now would give me so much pleasure." He was now struggling to get the words out. His hands were shaking as he tried to lift the cup of water to his lips. The boy guided the cup to the old man's mouth. "Please rest, Teng. You're so tired," begged Susan, showing her concern. "I will rest soon enough, young lady," croaked the old man. "My task is nearly over. I feel the heavenly fields beckoning me." "She's right, Teng. You must rest a little," said Blake. "Another hour or two will not make any difference." "Ah, you as well, Professor," sighed Teng. "You are right. I have waited so long for this moment that I grow careless. I must rest long enough to complete my story." Teng assumed his lotus position and fell silent. The boy and two monks left the cave and returned soon after with hot tea and rice cakes. "You may speak quietly. My master is in deep meditation," said Ngu softly. "We have prepared a place for you to rest later," he added as he left the cave. They were all sat deep in their own thoughts as they took refreshments, and for quite some time nothing was said. Then Blake broke the silence. "I hope mankind is ready for all this newfound knowledge." "Of course we are. Even Teng here thinks so," replied Leo. "You've changed your tune a bit, haven't you, Leo?" interrupted Susan. "Yes, well, maybe I was just a little bit hasty." Blake and Leo proceeded to have one of their discussions on the ramifications of such a find. Susan had to intervene more than once, with the pair getting more heated and the discussions getting more lively. She reminded them of Teng. "Well, if that's the way you're going to think," continued Leo, their discussion having turned to the subject of pollution, "then why don't you get rid of the main cause of pollution, mankind?" "A little bit drastic, don't you think?" interrupted Teng. "Ah, it invigorates the mind to hear such an open debate as this. Thank you, gentlemen." "Sorry, Teng," apologised Blake. "We disturbed your rest." "No, Professor, not at all. It is time to carry on. Freedom of speech, as you are probably aware, is not so freely permitted in Tibet. You are fortunate in the West to have such a luxury." Teng took a sip of tea, a deep breath, and then continued. "My master told me he believed the contents of the cavern to be over 14,000 years old. The device and machines in that cavern are far in advance of even your technology in the West. I'm sure that some of the devices in the wrong hands could and would be used for immoral purposes by unscrupulous persons wanting power or wanting to make money at the expense of others, or worse still, make warfare. So, Professor, I beg of you, for the good of all mankind, share this knowledge with all the world." Teng turned to the boy and stared at him through sightless eyes. After a few moments of silence, the boy got up. Visibly shaken and upset, he ran out of the cave. "Is he all right?" asked Susan. "Ah," sighed Teng. "I have just told him to leave, that I am soon to be leaving this world. Do not worry for him. He will always have a home at Sarah Monastery." Blake and Leo looked at each other in puzzlement, for none of them had seen or heard said conversation between Teng and the boy. Susan, although she couldn't quite put a finger on it, had earlier suspected something more than just friendship between the boy and the old man. Leo looked at Blake and shrugged his shoulders. "Ah," rasped Teng, "you Westerners have much to learn. We converse with our minds." "Telepathy?" voiced Blake. The old man nodded. "I knew it," voiced Susan. "Yes, young lady, you are very astute," said Teng. "I could feel your inquisitive mind as you watched the boy and myself earlier. You see, I am not so blind after all." He took another sip from his cup and then continued. "It was 13 years ago when I found him as an abandoned baby, not far from this cave, at the top of the ravine. At that time I could see, or at least partially. The boy was left to die, perhaps because of his deformities, which would make him useless on a farm and just another mouth to feed. This may sound heartless, I know, but..." Teng wheezed and coughed violently as the two young monks braced him, protecting his very fragile frame. Composing himself, Teng continued. "Well now, I soon found out that the boy was a telepathic, as I have been all my life. That is how I have managed to keep one step ahead of the Chinese all these years." Leo muttered something inaudible. "You do not believe, young man," responded Teng in a rasping voice. "That does not matter. But Professor, have you not noticed that since you came across the pouch, you have been making unexplained decisions, acting irrationally and out of character?" He paused and waited for a response, which was slow to come. "Well, yes, I suppose so," hesitated Blake. "I have been with you since you received the pouch, helping and guiding you," gasped Teng. "The statue is charged with my vibrations. Just by holding it, you are in tune with me." The old man fell silent, wheezing and struggling to find his breath. "Please rest," urged Susan. "Soon, soon," replied Teng. "Now remember, at the palace, you found my room," struggled Teng. "So there was a hidden room," voiced Blake. Teng forced a smile and slowly nodded his head. "I was a young medical student assigned to take care of the Dalai Lama, who had been in poor health. He still had his duties to perform as head of state, so I was assigned to be with him 24 hours a day. What an honour! I spent over 1 year with him. We grew very close, like brothers. I had my own room next to his office, which was unheard of in those days. Students usually shared 20 or more to a room. It was at this time when my master from the Chatpuri Medical College approached the Dalai Lama and took him into his confidence." Teng's voice was hardly audible now, his strength weakening by the minute. "Please, come closer," he beckoned. The Dalai Lama was getting over his illness. My master, then, asked that I be excused from duties indefinitely, because my life had been plotted out for me by the oracle and the wise ones. The Dalai Lama reluctantly agreed. After hearing of the task set before me, I was to become a virtual recluse, hiding away with a knowledge stored in my head, to be revealed when the time was right. The Dalai Lama and I had grown very close over that year. Imagine the most powerful man in Tibet paying me the honour of not letting another soul into my room. He ordered that the room be sealed up, in honour of my sacrifice. His very words. Teng lay silent, smiling, as the fond memories of his life and friendship in the Potala came to an end. All sat in deep thought. Blake was in no doubt now that the old man must be speaking the truth. How else could he explain the voices and the visions in his head? "Now my task is over," continued the old man. "My burden shed. You now have the great responsibility of telling the world. I now put you in the very capable hands of these two young students of mine, who have been with me many years, caring and guiding me and doing my bidding." Ngoo gently lowered the old man's head down onto the pillow. "You will be safe with them, for as with many of my previous protectors, they were not chosen for their religious devotions. They were chosen for their martial arts skills. All monks undergo self-defense training, but these two showed exceptional talent. They were given special training. Their minds, strength and physical skills are enhanced tenfold using ancient secrets only to be revealed to the select few. Reflexes, speed, agility, all used to such effect that they might be interpreted as precognition. For 5 years they received intensive training both in fighting and herb medicine. Unbeknown to them at that time, their sole purpose would be to look after me." "Yes, you will be safe with them," croaked Teng. "Take heed," he gasped. "Prepare yourselves both mentally and physically, for you will be soon taken to the cavern. The journey will be hard and treacherous, but you shall reap the rewards. Mankind's future is in your hands." The old man forced his head off his cushion and held out his shaking hand. Professor, closer please," beckoned Teng. Blake took hold of the old man's thin, skeletal hand. It was deathly cold, and it sent a shiver right up Blake's spine. Then Teng started chanting in a low voice. He gripped Blake's hand tightly. After a few moments, his grip was no more as he collapsed back down on his cushion. The old man's life was fast ebbing away. The two young monks ushered Blake, Susan and Leo out of the cave. They were led deeper into the tunnels, where they entered another small chamber. Inside, butter lamps had already been lit and a meal had been prepared, although nobody felt like eating. Outside, a bitter wind had raised its head, sending gusts of cold wind down the tunnels. The butter lamps flickered wildly in the chamber to each rush of wind. Ghostly shadows danced around the walls, which were made all the more eerie by the chanting of the two monks echoing down the tunnels from Teng's cave. The smell of incense filtered into every nook and cranny of the underground hideaway, giving them a sudden realization that a ceremony was being held for Teng. The mood was sombre in that little chamber, as three figures lay quietly contemplating the long, hard life of Teng the monk. Then came the sound of gongs. At that very moment, Blake heard, or thought he heard, Teng's voice. "Thank you, Professor." Shortly after, one of the monks entered the chamber and announced that Teng was free. His life on earth had come to an end. "May we go and pay our final respects?" asked Blake solemnly. "Soon," replied the young monk. "First, we have to guide his soul." It was an age-old ritual to guide the soul on the correct path to the afterlife. The rest of the night was a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that they could not have known this wise old man a bit longer, but relief that his heavy burden had now been lifted. The sound of gongs and chanting echoed throughout the night as the old man's soul was given safe guidance into the next world. They all eventually fell into a long and uneasy sleep. Well, thank you for listening again. That's the end of that chapter, and hopefully I'll be with you again in about a week's time. Once again, Happy New Year to you all. Take care, stay safe and be healthy. Bye bye.